On today's episode, we have Brian Hansen. He is the founder of Brian Hansen Consulting. He has 15 plus years building and scaling go-to-market teams, specifically in the post-sales space. Brian, really great as always to chat, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yes, thanks, Mikey. I'm excited to be here. Absolutely. When you asked me to think about things that surprised me, it was a fun exercise to go back through it in my mind.
Yeah, I bet. And I guess just jumping right into it then, what did you come up with? Let's start with just context. Like, where were you? What company was this, and your team structure at the time?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I've got extensive experience working with post-sale teams, specifically in customer success. My main focus has been B2B SaaS companies. That's where customer success had grown up and been very effective as a tool. And taking us back to one of my last roles, I was a director of customer success at a company called Aurora Solar. And we had about 20 or so CSMs at the time. We had a pretty good structure with regard to different segments, small, medium, larger customers. And what we were working on at the time was really trying to figure out how to segment not only the customer base, but segment the CSM's activities, and making sure that their time spent was on the right customers doing the right things. And so kind of the normal breakdown at that point is you look at ARR first, and you say, how do we split this out from the standpoint of making sure that CSMs are spending as much time as possible with the heaviest ARR customers. But there was a lot of process still baked into even the smaller customers, and working through that with working through their problems and questions and how to use the product, etc. And so that was the moment. It was like, what do we do here? How do we make sure that we're creating a kind of a modern touch point for customers and motion for this CS org? And so we were thinking through how to make changes. And so we'll get to I'll leave it there, but that was the context of what we were thinking about, what we were trying to do, and some of the concerns we had when we were thinking about change, because that's always a tricky thing to put through.
Yeah, and before getting super deep into like how you kind of implemented the changes and the learnings, like you said you wanted to modernize the approach, but just to make sure, like, why? What was the problem you were trying to solve by modernizing the approach?
It's always about revenue, you know. So for me, like that's the North Star for anything that we should be doing within CS, is thinking about how to improve gross retention and net revenue retention. And so that was the issue is we were losing customers. I mean, the churn is always there, right, Mikey? So it's not that we were specifically thinking that we were damaging ourselves by having poor process, but we needed to improve gross and net revenue retention. And so we were thinking through how best to do that, and looking at a day of a CSM, you have 8, 9, 10 hours to be working. And so we wanted to really maximize that. And so when I say modernize, that means also building in some digital touch components and some self-serve components, not relying solely on one-on-one interactions that the CSMs would have. And so that was the motion, is like, how do we get better retention? How do we get bigger upsells and more consistent upsells? And I think another key piece to this is, how do we measure the right activities? So building some fields into Salesforce that we were using, and building in some process that holds people accountable to the things that we know are going to lead to improved retention and expansion. So picture that the leading activities needed some adjustment to impact the lagging results of gross and net revenue retention.
Yeah. Makes sense. And we definitely are constantly communicating that with our customers in the CS and post-sales world. It's like, don't just track the lagging indicators. You need to understand what inputs are driving that. And likewise, don't just track the inputs, because you could have the same number of calls and vastly different quality, and it's a nuanced equation there to manage over time. But so can you maybe continue the thread there? I'm curious, like what did you start to implement, and maybe what were some of the aha moments as you started to go through that modernization process?
Yeah. So there was a lot that we were trying to do, I should say, there was a lot that we could do. So we tried to keep it as simple as possible, and to do so, stay focused on ARR. So our initial intention was for smaller customers, and for us that was about 25K and below of ARR. They were going to get a different experience, and it was going to be more self-service, more focused on using support as the tier one or the initial touch point that they would have with us on the post-sale side. Mm-hmm. But we were quite nervous about that. When you feel like you're taking something away from people, we were cautious. We were thinking how this would affect their experience. We were thinking, would this spike our churn even more if we took away this type of service? What we found was that CSMs were pretty darn engaged with these customers, and that makes sense when you think about kind of the 80-20 split of smaller customers. Many times they need more hands-on guidance. Sometimes the use case isn't as tight as it would be with some of their larger customers. Sometimes the sophistication level of the people using the service just isn't as tight from a business acumen perspective, and that's no knock on smaller companies. It's just some of the reality of how they were using this particular tool. And so we were nervous about making some of these changes. And so we spent a lot of time talking and thinking about it. And I think that was my first indication that something was wrong, was the amount of time that we were spending deliberating on what do we do and how do we do it and what are the potential risks. And I will also say, the CSMs themselves were reluctant to see this type of change because they felt compelled to help these customers. I think we find that CSMs in general are an empathetic group. They want to help people. And there's a component to busyness equals value, I think, a lot of times in work situations. And that's something that I've learned over time is busyness does not equate value. And so we had to show the CSMs in kind of stark terms with some mathematical equations. When you're spending this much time on smaller customers, you're missing it with larger customers. And one of the biggest things you're missing is upsell opportunities. So look at your amount of opportunities that you've created in your book of business. What if you were able to spend more time with some of these larger customers and create an upsell opportunity with customer X and customer Y and customer Z? What would that do for revenue coming out of this org? And what would that do to your bonus? Because CSMs in this particular case were bonused on gross and net revenue retention. And so they were also a bit nervous that if this change went through, churn would grow. They're losing some control over some of that as well by handing off the experience to self-serve or to support. So a lot of different factors, Mikey, on how we were thinking about this. But once we finally figured it out and pulled the trigger, the biggest learning, the biggest aha moment, or the biggest surprise to me certainly was customers do not care. Like they don't care who they're talking to necessarily. They just want answers to their questions, and they want some easy ways to use the product that they're paying for so that they see value. And I think that was a surprise to a lot of us, including the CSMs who had built these relationships on one-on-one interactions with their customers, and their assumption was that when we take that away, the customer is going to be upset. They're going to be less able to use the product. And what we found was that wasn't the case. I don't think we had a single complaint that we removed the one-on-one access as the main point of contact. We did keep that as a background, so if there was a backup, I should say, if there was something that elevated or escalated, the CSM could step back in. But I don't think we had a single complaint, and what we found was that, in particular, the thing that really excited me was that upsell opportunities increased, and we started to track new KPI of CS qualified leads and giving people an incentive to show that their work was resulting in, as we were talking about, a leading indicator, CS qualified leads, going up in Salesforce and being tracked in that way, and they would have an opportunity to earn some additional dollars if those deals closed. So all of that was a great result of taking a moment and saying, we're talking about this way too much. Let's take some action, see what happens, and not be scared of the potential outcome.
Yeah, it's a really great story, and resonates a lot because I've been on the side of the CSM who you have these relationships, and there is that fear of handing it off and giving it to someone else, and it's very hard from the IC's perspective to separate. Like, at the end of the day, you're helping two people. Like, I think that's how a lot of CSMs see it. Like, I'm helping this person, and one of them happens to be a $10,000 account. One of them's a $100,000 account. But in the moment, they're just people, and you end up focusing on helping a person. And you really need to reinforce both at like the structural level, the guardrails you place as a leader on your team, and making sure that CSM is confident that the fallback of a support team or self-service will not degrade the experience for that person that they know and that they feel responsible for driving through a successful relationship with your company. And so along those lines, I'm curious, like, what was the primary, was it like the CSMs were still owning the accounts and they were responsible for NRR at those accounts, but it was just a support person that was the first line of defense? Like, maybe a little bit of the operational magic I'd be curious about. This might be too much in the weeds for some people, but I'm curious.
No, we kept it as the overall book was still where you were going to get bonused and what you were responsible for and what your targets were for. So there was a little bit of a rub from the standpoint of like not having direct control over the initial interactions with customers, but to your point, we also were able to execute this because we did really trust the support team that we were pointing people to, and we had pretty good self-serve content. I think everybody can do better with their self-serve content, and this was a few years ago, and so AI has really allowed people to build much stronger and more robust knowledge bases based on tickets that are coming in and what people are asking for and how they're looking at some product telemetry and things like that. But we did our best to provide some very useful self-serve content. So, but to answer your question, yes, there was no difference with regard to how we were sharing the responsibility of the actual outcomes of gross and net revenue retention. So that did not change. And we were excited to see that the numbers improved, as I said, with regard to NRR in particular. GRR stayed pretty steady, so that there was no big dip, which was really great to see. In order to continue to grow revenue, you have to have a solid base of gross revenue retention, and then layering on these additional upsell opportunities. So that was a great outcome from what we were seeing.
And how much of that was like owned by you as the functional leader, like leading the CS team, versus you obviously have dependencies on support organization, like there's probably the enablement team or product who's creating the documentation. Like, how did you kind of get not just the CSMs to buy in, but like the organization as a whole to buy into this approach? Because someone could perceive it as you want your team to do less work. Like, that's what you're trying to do, and that's not the goal. Like, how did you make that case?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, speaking of relationships, we mentioned that earlier. It always comes down from a leadership perspective to the relationships that you've got cross-functionally. So bringing people on board, and everybody's got a similar mandate. You know, it's not just customer success to do more with less. Everybody's shrinking on headcount. Everybody is really focused on how do we become more profitable for what we have, and so it is not an unknown strategy that we were working through. And so getting on board to understand what each of these other teams' strategies were and what each of their mandates were was really important. So giving some and getting some back and collaborating together was really what allowed us to be thinking through this, and just having quality people. Like my time there was just all of the leaders, all of the people there were very solid and wanted to help each other. And so through building these relationships and then going to these other leaders and saying, this is what we want to do and this is how we're going to execute it on our side, we need your help to line some of these things up. People were willing to do so, and ultimately because the North Star was more revenue and more efficient revenue. And so that's, I think, the gift that CS has, is the ability to point back to whatever initiatives we're building. It is all in the benefit of the customer, B, well, maybe say like the right fit customer, or the best fit customer, and it's okay to lose some customers that aren't a great fit if they're taking up an inordinate amount of time. And we'll put a pin in that because I do want to talk about some of the things that we use Lumopath for, specifically around cost to serve. So we can come back to that in a moment, but it's all in the benefit of best fit customers, which drives revenue. And so if anybody is working on anything, that's a gift, like I said, of that customer success has to point back to what we're doing here is going to directly impact revenue. So it wasn't too hard of a sell.
Yeah, makes tons of sense. And I am curious then as that to take that pin out, the cost to serve stuff that you were talking about. Can you maybe get into that a little bit?
Yeah. So we brought Lumopath in towards the end of my stay at Aurora Solar. So I didn't have too much time to work on it there. But I've watched, where you guys have gone. It's been really impressive. But I can say for what we did use it there, it was very. I thought it was just very cool to be able to plot on a graph the amount of time that people were spending, and then overlay that with ARR for our customer base. And that was some really cool eye-opening stuff. But what we were seeing, even before that, we knew kind of in our gut, in our bones, that we were spending way too many hours on these lower ARR customers. This was just coming from anecdotal evidence from CSMs and their managers that they were just feeling stuck on some of these. And I was mentioning earlier, feeling relationshiply connected to these customers as well. So we knew more qualitatively that was happening. But when we started to use what your tool provides with that graph of plotting cost to serve, it was more stark. And that was, again, a great way to be able to show from a collaboration perspective, cross-functionally, this is what we are trying to do. We're trying to take from the bottom right of the bottom left of low ARR and not the right fit of service, to the top left of like these are high ARR customers and they're right sized with the amount of service that we're providing. And so taking that to finance was a new door opening for me as well. So you mentioned who we were collaborating with, marketing and support and things like that, but through this process, I was also able to open doors and connect with finance about what we're doing and why it's important from a cost to serve perspective as well. And what that led to was discussions about margin and headcount and all these really important pieces for the business. So that was a nice kind of secondary piece to this. Was we started this process without this type of hard data, then we layered on top of it what was actually happening with cost to serve from more of a quantitative perspective, and it made the initiative even more robust.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, and it's something that like I wish we had been able to work together longer at Aurora, you and I, because some of the newer stuff since LLMs have evolved, like now you're not even limited to just saying, okay, we're spending a lot of time on these customers, but the magic of an LLM where you can say like, all right, for this segment where we're spending too much time, what are the 3 things that are taking time that if we automate or offload or pass on to support will allow us to spend more time with our high value strategic customers, and taking it like the quantitative to quantitative plus recommendations that are again back into like the qualitative space, which I could go on for an hour on that, so I won't go down that tangent right now.
I'm sure you could.
But love this use case. Love I think people will really resonate with this because I'd say almost every single customer that I talk to has experienced a version of this this experience that you had of the long tail clients. Any main kind of takeaways that you had from this experience that you want listeners to not leave this without clocking?
Yeah, I think if I'm trying to keep it as kind of high level and impactful as possible, it is to not be afraid to shake the tree on process. I think that was the thing that stuck with me through this was, as I mentioned earlier, it just took us too long to deliberate on some of these things, to think through it, to what if. When the result, we needed to plan for it and we needed to have some pieces from an execution perspective. But But it was really exciting to me to kind of just hit this process with a hammer and see what happened, and be pleasantly surprised with the result. And I do so with the very clear mindset of the reason we were thinking about any changes was revenue. So as long as you've got revenue as your North Star to why you are doing something, that you can increase revenue with customer centricity also in mind, shake the tree, hit the piñata, whatever you want to, whatever metaphor you want to use here. But that was the biggest piece for me, was don't be afraid to make a change, and see where the chips fall.
Love it. Well, I appreciate the time as always, Brian. And if anyone listening is looking for some consulting on the customer success side, post sales, building out your organization, scaling it, the gamut, Brian's amazing, and highly recommend reaching out. Is there an email that you'd like people to reach out to? We can also put in the show notes, but any plug there, I'm more than happy to make for you.
Sure. Yeah, you can go to brianhansenconsulting.com. Also LinkedIn. My handle is bhansenconsulting. Those are two great ways to get in touch. And you're absolutely right. I love talking about all this stuff, and it gets me really fired up to be thinking through post-sale revenue, cross-functional collaboration, customer centricity. All those pieces really resonate with me, and love chatting with people about it.
Well, thank you again for the time, Brian.
Thank you. It was great being here.